This isn't the kind of story I usually tell. I tend to keep the past close, quiet, and buried. But some experiences, they don't stay buried. Not because you haven't moved on, but because they left something inside you. Something that still echoes. Something that deserves to be understood. This was one of those. For the first time, I'm taking you through something real. Something I lived. Something that shook me, humbled me, and ultimately changed me. If you've ever had someone go silent only to suddenly reappear, you might know exactly how this feels. Like the video and subscribe to Stoic Station, where we turn stillness into strength. It had been 2 full months. Not a single text, not a view on my stories, no reaction, no breadcrumb, no closure. Just silence, the kind that doesn't echo, it absorbs. The kind that forces you to rebuild your thoughts without the comfort of even being misunderstood. I had started to adjust to the stillness. I was working, staying focused, mind deep in routine. That day I was driving, hands on the wheel, music in my ears, another delivery to make, nothing out of the ordinary. Until it was. Siri's voice came through, cutting right through the music, clear and unmistakable. Incoming call from Christina. I didn't move. My fingers stayed frozen on the steering wheel. My chest got tight. For a second, I thought maybe I misheard. Maybe it was someone else. But no, there it was. Her name, after 2 months of nothing. And in that moment, the silence I had been learning to live in cracked wide open. You'd think I'd feel relief, maybe even excitement. But that's not what hit me. What hit me was fear. Not fear of her, but of what this call could mean. Was it an emergency? Was someone hurt? Was she calling to say something final? Or worse, was she calling because she regretted it? That's what silence does. It gives you space to heal, but it also gives your mind too much room to imagine. And when you've spent weeks teaching yourself not to look back, one moment like this can pull everything forward again. Everything you thought you buried rises to the surface like it never left. I wasn't ready for the call. I wasn't prepared to hear her voice again. But there it was. And even before I answered, I could feel it. Something was about to change, whether I wanted it to or not. And that's what shook me most. Not the fact that she called, but the fact that even after all that silence, she still had that power to stop everything, just by showing up again. So I answered the call, still in the driver's seat, still trying to keep my breath steady. I spoke like I wasn't shaken, like I hadn't just had my entire emotional balance knocked off center. I kept my tone even, measured, but the truth is, I was already bracing for impact. And then I heard her voice. "Hey, can you hear me?" It wasn't just the sound of her that caught me off guard. It was the way she said my name. She rarely used it, my full name, unless something was serious. And even though the words were simple, there was something behind them. A slight shake, a hesitation, a softness that didn't feel like peace. It felt like weight. She tried to play it light, told me she just wanted to check in, asked how I'd been, said she had just gotten back from a trip with some friends. On the surface, it sounded casual, but I know her voice. I know how it moves when she's holding something back. And somewhere between her saying it was a great trip and telling me what they did, I heard it, clear as day. Her voice cracked, just enough for me to catch it, just enough for everything underneath the surface to show. She tried to swallow it, tried to move past it, like it didn't happen. But I heard it, and in that exact moment, everything shifted. Because that wasn't the voice of someone making polite conversation. That wasn't a simple check-in. That was the voice of someone standing on the edge of something they couldn't quite name. Like she had rehearsed the call in her head, maybe dozens of times. but never prepared for what it would actually feel like to hear my voice again. And maybe she thought she'd be fine. Maybe she believed she could keep it cool. But the truth is, emotions don't ask for permission to show up. They come when they're triggered, and hearing me, after all that silence, must have triggered something. What struck me wasn't just that she got emotional. It was that she was trying so hard not to. That crack in her voice? It wasn't weakness. It was something deeper. It was the sound of a heart trying to stay composed when it wasn't ready to face what it still remembered. And in that space between pretending and breaking, I knew this wasn't just a random call. She was carrying something she hadn't said out loud. Maybe she still couldn't. Maybe she didn't plan to. But it was there. And whether she spoke it or not, I could feel it. Right after that pause, after the crack in her voice settled into the air, she shifted the conversation like nothing had happened, tried to steer it towards something lighter, something safer. That's when she brought it up. She said she'd seen my Instagram story, said she saw I had moved into the new place. Then, almost without thinking, she added, "I remember when we toured that apartment together. It looks like home now." She said it so casually. But those words didn't land light. They hit like a quiet wave, slow, soft, but strong enough to pull memories back to the surface. Because she didn't just comment on my apartment, she named a place tied to everything that unraveled between us. That space, those walls, that view, was supposed to be the next chapter we wrote together. She was there when I was searching for stability. She helped me walk through the empty rooms and imagine what life could look like. Back then, she had a hand on my shoulder and a voice full of shared plans. Now, I was the only one living in what was once our vision, and for her to mention it just like that reminded me of something I had been trying to unfeel for months. I had worked so hard to make that place mine, to settle in, to start over, to scrub the memories from the corners and fill the rooms with new energy. But the moment she spoke about it, something shifted. Because even when you think you've moved forward, even when the boxes are unpacked and the pictures are on the wall, the past has a way of finding its way back in. Not through the front door, but through a voice you weren't expecting to hear again. She thought she was just acknowledging something simple, but what she actually did was open a memory I had been carrying by myself. And that's the part no one sees. You can heal, you can grow, you can change the locks and repaint the walls, but when someone casually names the very place where your pain took root, it doesn't just bring the memory back, it reactivates the silence you had to sit in once they were gone. That's what hit me. Not just that she remembered, but that I never had the option to forget. I was still sitting with everything she'd said, the way her voice cracked, the way she remembered the apartment, the way old feelings crept in without warning, and I hadn't fully processed any of it yet. I told myself to focus on the rest of the day, to not overthink what the call meant. She reached out, we spoke, and that could have been the end of it. But an hour later, it happened again. Siri's voice broke the quiet once more, just like before. This time, not with a call, but with a message. "You received a long message from Christina." And just like that, everything I had been holding in place started to rattle. It's strange how something so small can carry so much weight. A text, a few words on a screen. But my body reacted before I could even think. My hands tensed, my heart picked up, and I froze. Not because of the message itself, but because of what it might contain. Was this going to be some kind of emotional whiplash? A delayed goodbye? A clean break disguised as a check-in? My mind jumped to the worst-case scenario, that she had met someone new and wanted to tell me before I heard it from someone else. That she wanted to soften the blow by being honest. Or maybe Maybe she was just reaching for closure I never asked for. Whatever it was, I wasn't ready. And I didn't want to open it until I was. Not because I was afraid of her. I wasn't. But I was afraid of what this message might reopen, of what it could reawaken in a heart I had spent months trying to quiet. That's what people don't talk about enough. It's not the big gestures that break us. It's the small, sudden things. The unexpected ping, the delayed follow-up, the soft hey that lands like a storm. I had survived the initial silence. I had done the work day by day to accept what was gone. But I wasn't naive. I knew how easily one message, especially from her, could unravel everything I'd worked so hard to bury. So I stood there, in the back of the truck, staring at my phone like it had become something dangerous, something alive, because it wasn't just a message, it was a test of everything I had become since the day she walked away. Eventually, I opened the message. I told myself to be steady, no expectations, no assumptions, just read it. But the moment my eyes landed on her words, I knew exactly what it was. It was soft, polite, thoughtful even. Hey, sorry for calling out of nowhere. I probably should have texted first. I saw your story and just wanted to check on you. I didn't expect to get emotional. I'm okay though. Just wanted to say I'm happy for you. That was it. But I felt every word more than she probably meant for me to. That second smiley face. It didn't feel light. It felt like the final period on a sentence I hadn't finished reading. That smiley face felt like a curtain dropping, like she knew I might still be holding on to something. And this was her way of gently putting that hope to rest. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't cold, but it was clear. Don't overthink it. Don't reach. Don't wait. Just accept the message for what it was, a check-in with a boundary. And right then, everything inside me deflated. Not in anger, not even in sadness, but in that silent way hope fades when it finally understands it's been alone. Because what she wrote wasn't malicious. It was composed. It was her way of keeping it safe. And I respected that, but it didn't make it easier. Sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from being hurt again. It comes from realizing the person who once held your heart no longer carries even a piece of it the way you still do. That while you've been wondering what the silence meant, they've been learning how to live inside it. It's not betrayal, it's just difference. You were healing with memory, they were healing with distance, and now you're face to face with the truth. They got to the other side, just not the same way you hoped. After reading her message, I didn't respond right away. I didn't spiral. I didn't go looking for hidden meanings. I just sat there for a while, letting the silence settle again. But this time, it felt different. Heavier, maybe, but also strangely peaceful. I could have tried to make sense of it. I could have drafted another reply, kept the conversation going, asked the questions she left unspoken. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't a moment to fix. It was a moment to release. So I sat still, quiet, and I prayed. Not for her to come back. Not for some sign that she still cared. Not even for answers. Just for the strength to let go. God, I don't know what this was. I don't know if it meant something or nothing at all. But if there's anything I need to see clearly, show me. And if not, help me to release it without bitterness, without clinging to something that no longer belongs to me. It wasn't a desperate prayer. It wasn't rooted in pain. It was rooted in peace. Because I wasn't chasing closure anymore, I was choosing clarity. Sometimes strength isn't loud. It doesn't look like action. It's not in the text you want to send or the call you want to make. Sometimes strength is in restraint, in choosing not to act when everything in you wants to reach back, when your ego wants answers, when your heart still wants to be seen, but you don't reach, you don't beg, you don't disturb what's settling just to feel something again. You just let it be, and that quiet surrender becomes its own kind of power, because letting go isn't weakness, it's trust, not in the past, not in the person, but in something greater than both. After that prayer, I felt no urgency, no need to do or undo anything. I had said what I needed to say, not to her, but to myself, and that in its own way was enough. Still, the mind doesn't quiet overnight. I thought about writing her again. Just a short message, a thank you, a follow-up. Something kind, something simple, something to keep the thread alive, even if it was just by a thread. I even typed out a few drafts, sat with the words, read them over like I was trying to convince myself they meant something more than what they were. But I didn't send them. Each time I reached for the send button, something in me paused. Not from fear, not from doubt, from clarity. I had already said enough. She had already said what she needed to, and sometimes what's left unsaid doesn't need to be filled. It needs to be honored. So I let it be. I left the message unsent and the silence unbroken. Because I realized something that day, something I think many of us learn the hard way. Not every open door is an invitation. Not every familiar voice is meant to echo into your future. And not every moment of vulnerability needs to be answered with action. Sometimes the real growth is in the restraint. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not respond. Not because you're indifferent, but because you've finally reached a place where your peace means more than your curiosity. And that silence, it spoke for me. It said, I'm not holding on. I'm not chasing. I'm not waiting for more. I'm moving forward, not away from you, but toward myself. After choosing not to respond, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel relief either, not right away. What I felt was stillness. And in that stillness, something shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for a follow-up, not for another sign, not for clarity that may never come. And for the first time since she left, I realized I didn't need to know what would happen next. I didn't need to reach for answers to feel at peace, because peace had nothing to do with what she did or didn't feel. It had everything to do with what I was finally learning to feel for myself. I'm not standing in the same place I was before. I'm not trying to go backward or rewrite anything. I'm not chasing closure through someone who already gave me all the silence I needed to find it on my own. Now I'm building something real, quietly, intentionally, a life that isn't based on what we were, but on who I'm becoming. And sure, some days her echo still lingers, but it doesn't drown me out anymore. The loudest voice in the room now is mine. So if you're in the place I was, in that space between confusion and hope, between memories and letting go, hear this. Not every check-in means come closer, and not every voice from your past is asking to be part of your future. Just because someone reaches out doesn't mean they're reaching for you, and just because it stirred something in you doesn't mean it was meant to stay. But that doesn't mean you're not worthy. That doesn't mean you're not enough. It just means it's time. Time to stop measuring your value by how someone else shows up. Time to stop loving on the condition that they'll return. Time to come home to yourself. You are not what you lost. You're what you learned. And sometimes what feels like the end is really just the first honest beginning. Let me speak directly to the man who's been here. You spent weeks in silence. You did the work. You faced the emptiness head on. And just when you were starting to find your footing again, she showed up. Not in person, not with answers, but with a voice that cracked through your progress like it never left. I've been there. And if you're anything like me, that call shook more than you expected. Not because it brought clarity, but because it reopened something you thought you had buried for good. She remembered details that mattered. She referenced spaces you built together, and with just a few casual words, she stirred up months of restraint you fought so hard to keep. But here's what I've learned. Not every message deserves a reply. Not every voice from your past deserves access to your present. The truth is, she may have been curious, but curiosity isn't commitment. Emotion isn't intention. And a cracked voice doesn't mean she's coming back. Sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is nothing. Let go without performing it. Stay silent without bitterness. And most of all, recognize that just because someone reappears doesn't mean you owe them anything. You're not the man who needs to be chosen. You're the man who chooses peace. And that is where your healing begins. Sometimes the hardest part isn't letting go. It's accepting that silence was the closure. She called. And suddenly it all came rushing back. The feelings, the memories, the weight. But her voice, her words, even her memory. They don't define your path anymore. You weren't made to live in the echo of what could have been. You were meant to rise, to build from what is, quietly, powerfully, on your own terms. If this message found you in that space between pain and peace, like the video. Subscribe to Stoic Station, where clarity begins in stillness.